So welcome to the 5th International Neurotraining Intensive Workshops. Oh, that's getting to be quite a mouthful, isn't it? This theme, or the theme for this group of seminars, is on pregnancy. Now, for those of you who have been to the seminars before and who are already instructors, this will qualify you to be able to instruct these workshops. For those of you who are not already instructors, then this is going to be very interesting and relevant information for you. And you would need then to be able to take teacher training instruction to be able to teach these workshops. And you can ask Estefania about that if you want to. Most of these workshops that we'll be doing through these next 5 days are going to be primarily what we call specific skills workshops. But the first one isn't. The first one is one of the innate system group. Now, the difference between the innate systems and specific skills is that an innate systems workshop is working specifically at reorganising a complete system within your body. They're all designed to reorganise a complete system. The specific skills workshops are different in that they are little neurological modules that have a specific effect on a person that are not related necessarily to a system. They're all neurological, and they're divided up into different modules that you can mix and match. You can move the modules around, but each module is complete in itself. So you don't want to change the order of anything in the module, but you can use the modules in different orders if you want. So the first one we'll be looking at is balancing your hormones. Yes. Now, a lot of people are very interested in hormones because they think that if they just get their hormones balanced, then everything else is going to get better. So a lot of people have it already in their head that hormones are really important. Yes, they are really important, and as you'll see from the rest of the workshops, they're not the only thing. The responses that we've had so far would suggest that the fear around pregnancy, the hormonal imbalances around pregnancy, and also the importance of detoxifying your body are very popular themes for people who are trying to be pregnant or who are pregnant or who are worried about the birth and post-pregnancy. The workshops have been organised as best I could to follow that time sequence of before, during and after. But to be able to do that efficiently, we needed to start with two really, really, really important aspects of pregnancy: the fears and the hormones. So we're doing the hormones first, simply because if you are excessively adrenally charged, if we were to do the fear stuff, people might go through the windows. So we're going to balance the hormones first, and then we'll go through some of the fear processes in the next workshop. Okay, balancing your hormones. Very, very important, and yet it's a very, very simple process once you understand what's going on. The hormones are developed through the activity of the glandular system. Now, if you open up your manuals to the charts, you'll see that you have a picture of our friend here who is illustrating to you where her gland reflex points are. All of the red spots here are points that relate to glands, not hormones. They're glandular reflexes. So I'm going to show you two, or if you want to, three distinct ways of being able to use these reflex points to reorganize the endocrine system. the glandular system that produces and regulates all the hormones. Now, there are things that are going on outside of you, like when people take the contraceptive pill, for example, or when they're taking other types of hormone replacement therapies, or they're drinking or eating lots of soy products. They're putting a lot of artificial hormones into their body, into their biochemistry, and these glands have to balance themselves to compensate for that input of hormones. But there are other things, like stress. Lots of stress create lots of increased adrenal hormone production. That interferes with other hormones. You've got to remember that this glandular system is a hierarchy. And this point up the top here relates to like the general of the army, the pituitary and also the pineal glands. But first and foremost is the pituitary gland. And it regulates all of the production from the other glands almost exclusively. There's only one gland that's more important than the pituitary, and that's the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus reflex relates to here, or is here, under the collarbone. So the hypothalamus is how we take a thought or a concept and change that into a biochemistry that helps us to act on that thought. So if you see a really sexy woman or a really sexy man, your hypothalamus is already producing the hormones that allows you to go as far as you like with that person. Whether you do or not is up to other thought processes. But your hypothalamus has already produced the hormones that make you feel good and want to do more, because it's now telling the pituitary to produce other hormones. The same thing happens when you see someone that you really don't like, either because of past experience or just because they look like somebody that you don't like. The hypothalamus is already producing the substances that tell your brain what to do about that person. And in this case, it'll be telling the pituitary gland to make more adrenaline so you can fight or run away from that person. Interesting, isn't it? So your hypothalamus may not be involved in everything because you may not have any definite thoughts about it. But if you do have definite thoughts or concepts related to a relationship, your work, some specific environment, or especially getting pregnant or being pregnant, then the hypothalamus is setting up the chemistry for that pregnancy to exist in. That's its job. It's leading you into its perceived future. I'll say that again. Its perceived future. If your hypothalamus thinks your future is going to be a certain way, and that doesn't include pregnancy, it can create a miscarriage. It can stop you from having the baby. It can stop you from doing anything you think you want if it has a different program that's going on. Now, the only way that it can do that is that if it's only running the show. If it's only running the show, it's only controlling the other glands the way it wants them to be organised. But that means there's no feedback coming to the pituitary, and the pituitary isn't telling the hypothalamus what it needs to do. It can only run the show if it's not paying any attention to the feedback from the other glands. So how we reinforce that feedback is part of the techniques that I'll be showing you a little bit later. So at the top here we have the pituitary. This also relates to the pineal gland. This is not only the stimulation of certain hormones, certain glands, but also through the pineal gland, it's the regulation of those things through different time cycles. And women have a lot more problems with the regulation of cycles of hormones than men do because they run on a 28-day cycle. It's called the moon cycle. And the pineal gland literally measures 28 days and what has to happen hormonally through those processes. In the Prepare Your Fertility workshop, we go through the 5 different phases of the menstrual cycle, as 28 days are broken up into 5 different sections. And there are points in there that can help you to regulate not only each section, but regulate the order of that section, those sections as well. So the pineal is really important in women for their menstrual cycle, and of course that's what supports becoming and maintaining pregnancy. In men, the cycle is 11 years. Talk about slow. Oh, I'm getting there, darling. It's just my pineal gland is stopping me. Well, the pineal gland in men relates to the solar cycle. And somebody's worked that out, that it's an 11-year cycle. So men go through hormonal changes, but it takes them 11 years to do it. So you girls, right, remember that. Hormonally, we are not as fast as you, and it's going to take us 11 years to get the job done. All right? So if you ask now, start waiting. The pineal and the pituitary have to work together. They have to work together, otherwise the rest of the hormonal system will collapse. All right? Now, they are very, very intimate in their connections, but their connections are actually remarkably complex. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that because they have the same electrical circuit that runs them both. And that reflex for that circuit is right here on the glabella. So you don't have to worry about what the cycles are or how they work together. If you want to regulate them, you just rub this point. That's very handy. Because really, you'd have to have a PhD in hormones to understand how those pineal and pituitary glands work together. They're really very intricate and complex. So these points are numbered in the way that they follow the hierarchy from the top down. 1 and 2 are the points for your hypothalamus, the top of the glandular tree. The hypothalamus is also in the brain, it's part of the nervous system, and it's also a gland. So number 3 then is the pituitary and pineal reflex, which is the second one in the hierarchy. Now the reflexes don't necessarily reflect that hierarchy, right? Otherwise hypothalamus should be up here somewhere, but the reflex here is a specific reflex for the hypothalamus. This is a specific reflex for pituitary, and you'll probably find that you'll get most of the change from rubbing the pituitary. Unless you have some really strange concepts, then the hypothalamus would probably do the job. So then the rest of the system is all following the numbering of this hierarchy. So as we go down from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, then we come to the thyroid and the parathyroids. All right? So we've gone from 3 now to 4 and 5. Now the numbering left to right doesn't make any difference. You could do 5 and then 4 and still get the same effect. But, because numbers follow logical sequences, then we've put the numbers in this order. So 4 and 5 down here between the 3rd and 4th ribs relate to the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. All right? Now, if any of you who have been pregnant and had post-pregnancy depression, the problem there is your thyroid and parathyroids. They're not regulated properly, and there could be lots of different reasons. It could be because of the adrenal system, or it could be because of the controls from the top. But if it's both, you're guaranteed to have postnatal depression. So if any of you have clients who have postnatal depression, and they may not even recognize it as such, they will come to you, they're depressed, they're irritable, they hate their baby, but they love their baby. Because their baby is so irritating to them that they can damage the baby. I've had a couple of clients who have been in that situation, and they hate themselves, but they have damaged their baby because they were just so stressed, and they just thought they were stressed. They didn't realise that that's actually part of the postnatal depression syndrome. And rebalancing not only their thyroid, but their thyroid relative to the other glands, just changed their life and probably saved their children's lives. So the effect of reorganising these hormones in these glands is really, really important. And it could be behind any imbalance. This could be behind any disease pattern or whatever, because if the hormones are out of balance and the person can't regulate them, they can't recuperate either. If they can't recuperate, they can't reorganise other things that are going on in their system. So it may be that at some point in your work with that client that you'll have to reorganise their hormonal system. Right? So don't underestimate this. This is a very, very powerful innate system, and it can be related to anything. This really can influence the biochemistry. In fact, I remember one woman, she had multiple allergies. Allergies to just about everything you can think of. Well, she'd been told to not eat the things that she was allergic to. So she became allergic to the things that she was eating. So then she couldn't eat them. So eventually she couldn't eat anything. She was allergic to water. She was even starting to become allergic to what she was breathing, the air. So in balancing this woman, it was all hormones. Hormones. And it came back to a time when she had given birth to her first child, she had postnatal depression, and she was given some medication for that. That was it. The medication locked that hormonal imbalance in place, and she was trying to live a normal life with this incredible chemical disturbance in her body. She had no hope. Then, reorganising all these glands together and getting the hormonal system working, her allergies disappeared in about 10 days. The doctors couldn't believe it. And it would have happened faster, except it takes about 10 to 14 days for your liver to break down the antibodies to what you're allergic to. And that's why it took 10 days. But reorganising that hormone system made all the difference. So don't underestimate this. This is a very, very strong system. So from the thyroid, we go down to, there's actually two sections here. There's actually another section in here that I haven't illustrated, which would probably be a good idea to do. It's not, I'll tell you anyway. Right on the corner of the bend of your sternum, it comes forward and it bends and it goes down. Right on that bend is a reflex for your thymus gland. But the reflex is behind the bone. So you actually have to tap the bone, and the actual tapping stimulates the reflex behind the bone, and that what stimulates the thymus gland. Thymus. And it sits in here between these four. Right? This turn happens at this point. And it also relates to 6 and 7. Now 6 and 7 is heart. And a lot of people don't realise, but the heart produces 2 hormones. Well, they know of 2. I think it actually produces about 7 hormones, but they know of 2 hormones. These 2 hormones are regulators for a lot of the systems below, like the urinary system, for example, but also for the ovaries. So the heart produces hormones that stimulate the liver, regulate the adrenal glands, and stimulate the ovaries and the testes. Most people don't know that the heart is an endocrine gland. The heart is really quite an amazing organ. So if the heart is having problems, it could be because of its hormonal connections. So in fact, rubbing these 2 points, 6 and 7, regulates the heart as a gland, but also in the other techniques, you'll see that we can tie the heart in with the rest of the glands and balance all those nice hormones. So that's heart here, and between there you can put a question mark number, or a T for thymus, right, which is right in between there, and you tap that point. Now, if you have any questions on how you use this with the muscle monitoring, for those of you who use that, you can ask me outside later and I'll tell you how to work with that. From the heart and the thymus, we go to number 8, which is the liver. Now, the liver is endocrine only in the sense that if the hormones that go in there are not broken down, they get kicked out again into the bloodstream. It doesn't produce hormones, but its job is to break them down when your body's had enough of them. So if you've produced a whole lot of progesterone or testosterone or something, and you don't need all of that, it goes back to the liver. The liver pulls it apart into its little proteins and reuses it for either other hormone production or for other things. So the liver actually works as an endocrine gland only if there's A, it's not doing its job in breaking the hormones down, or B, there are too many hormones for it to break down in a certain period of time, so it puts the excess back into the bloodstream. So this is a very critical situation, because if you're producing a certain amount of some hormones on a continuous basis and the liver isn't breaking them down, it's putting the same hormones back into the bloodstream at a slightly later time. So the timing gets put out, the amount of hormones is too much, then the regulation of the endocrine system itself tries to turn down the hormone production. If it does that, now you have less of the original hormone being produced, less going to the liver, no more being put into the bloodstream by the liver, so now you have a deficiency of a hormone. So then the regulating glands say we need more of that hormone and produces excess. Then you have excess from the excess, and now you have an excess. You really got lots of hormones. So it starts out like a little wobble and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's called manic depression. You get it? Manic is where the adrenal hormones are way too high because the liver is not breaking them down fast enough. The depression is the reaction to that is to stop producing adrenaline completely and everything goes boom, flat. Because when the adrenal glands have been doing that, they've been turning the thyroid down. So now the person goes into an exchange, or the opposite, so they have high adrenals, low adrenals. But when they have high adrenals, they have low thyroid. They have low adrenals, they also have low thyroid because it's slower to respond. Plus, the adrenals have been turning it off anyway. Eventually what happens is the general says, I don't understand. None of my soldiers are following my commands. What's going on? Every time that situation occurs where you have excesses of any hormones, you have to go back to the liver. Stimulate the liver reflex, even by itself, is a really good thing because it helps the liver to break down the excess hormones and start a regular process of helping the endocrine system to function better. So in manic depression, you always have liver involvement. It's behind it. It's the reason why. You'll also find that people who have high blood pressure have a hormonal problem that's affecting the liver. High blood pressure always starts with the liver. Then we compensate in lots of different ways with the spleen and the thymus and the pituitary and the kidneys and eventually the heart to try to regulate the blood pressure. But it always starts with the liver, and it's almost always involved with hormones. The other alternative from the high blood pressure point of view is toxicity. toxic liver will produce high blood pressure. Now that high blood pressure is going to affect the adrenal glands, which is going to affect the hormonal system, which affects the pituitary. And so you can see these chain reactions just keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. The end result is we can have so many miscommunications between different endocrine glands that our hormonal system is totally foreign to how our genetics wants us to be. We have to reorganize it. So the liver isn't really an endocrine gland, but it acts like an endocrine gland when it has too many hormones in there and it puts them back out into the bloodstream. 9 and 10 relate to the spleen and the pancreas. The spleen and the pancreas are particularly related to the production of insulin, which is the opposite, the enemy of adrenaline. So the hormones produced by particularly the pancreas, but regulated by the spleen, is insulin. There are other substances that the pancreas produces and that the spleen produces to help the blood chemistry itself to be regular. But if the balance between adrenaline and insulin is not correct, you have another up and down, and it's called hypoglycemia. Too much blood sugars, too little blood sugars. So what happens? Have you heard of pregnancy-related diabetes? That's where the spleen and the pancreas are producing no insulin. No more insulin. We're too busy doing other things like making a baby to organise insulin, and the reason is that the person was hyper or hypoadrenic. They were making too much or too little adrenaline before they became pregnant. Then they became pregnant. The pancreas says, I've had enough of this, I'm not doing this at all, and doesn't produce enough insulin, so their blood sugars just go right through the roof. Usually the demand on your blood sugar system is much higher during pregnancy. You have to have more energy to make another person inside you. So when these 2 points are sore, which in most people is most of the time, it's either because you have too much adrenaline, you've got too much stress, and as a consequence you're eating too much sugar. Sugar is not good, right? But people tell me, but sugar, it's natural. So is cyanide. Cyanide is found naturally, and you don't go and eat that, do you? I hope not. That's not an invitation. But people eat sugar and say, but it's natural. All it is doing is serving their addiction to turning the sugar into adrenaline. They're addicted to their own adrenaline. And it's a real addiction. You've heard of these adrenal sports? Like what? Base jumping, where they get up to the top of a cliff and they just jump off. Well, luckily there's a rope attached, or they jump off, bungee jumping, jump off a bridge or something. These are an adrenal rush sport. These people are addicted to their own adrenaline. If they don't have high levels of adrenaline, they feel depressed. Because they are depressed. Because their whole system has been trained to expect a large amount of adrenaline. That's very dangerous because the adrenal system, which is down here 11 and 12, is part of a mandatory system that says you have to have a certain amount of adrenaline for your heart and lungs. Your heart and lungs must have a minimum amount of adrenaline. So what happens with excess adrenal production is that the pituitary starts saying, produce less adrenaline. Less adrenaline. Don't produce any more adrenaline. Well, what happens? The person starts to get lung problems, they get palpitations, they have other cardiovascular problems that go away when they have an adrenal rush. Anybody here had injections in the dentists? Yes? painkiller stuff, right? What they're putting into you is adrenaline. So the effect is you don't feel pain. Well, if you're producing your own adrenaline, you have the same effect. You don't feel the pain. But it's not just physical pain that you don't feel anymore. It's emotional pain as well. The more adrenaline you have, in fact, I've had some clients come to me straight after being to the dentist, and they're happy, they're really great, nothing's wrong with my world, everything's fantastic. Until the adrenaline wears off, and then they're crying and they're so depressed, that's terrible. And it's only because they had their shot of adrenaline. If you're having a heart attack, for example, that they have this little emergency thing that you can inject yourself with. What is that? Adrenaline, right? It'll artificially bump up your nervous system to the point where it can stop you from dying. It's very strong stuff. So what do? We do things to produce more because it makes us feel better. We feel fantastic when we have huge amounts of adrenaline. The trouble is adrenaline burns off really quickly. For us guys, we produce more testosterone than progesterone and estrogen, where you girls produce more estrogen and progesterone than testosterone. That's the way it's supposed to be if you're going to make babies. That's why men don't make babies. Well, that's one reason anyway. There are other logistical problems. But primarily, testosterone and adrenaline for men give them a sense of euphoria that seems like they can do anything. They can fly. So what do? They fly. They tie ropes on their legs and they jump off buildings. Right? They get on these little, parachute things and jump off cliffs and fly. They really do feel like they can fly. So they create the experience, the circumstance where they can do that. These things are invented by men, not women, because men have the testosterone to challenge their environment. Women don't like being challenged. They will avoid it like the plague. That's why a lot of women can't get pregnant, because they're in an environment that's challenging them. It's stopping them from producing the hormones that nurture the pregnancy process, so they don't get pregnant in the first place. If they do get pregnant and they're in a really stressed environment that's challenging them and trying to get them to make adrenaline and other stress-related hormones, they're not going to have a very easy birth process, and a lot of other problems are going to come to the surface. It's guaranteed. There's actually 3 hormones that are most important during pregnancy. The most important of them is oxytocin. Oxytocin is your, I was going to say love hormone, but it's not a love hormone. It's your bonding hormone. It's your feeling good and mothering hormone. It's your bonding hormone. Yeah? This is the hormone that's produced when you sit down at a meal and you have a really nice meal with really good friends. The good feeling you get from that is oxytocin. That's what's being produced. So instead of getting pregnant, just go and have a good dinner. You get over it, But it doesn't always work that way. So after the good dinner, because you feel really good, that's when babies get made. So be careful. So the adrenal points, 11 and 12 here, are specifically for helping the adrenal glands to rebalance. That's specifically what they're for. Way down here on either end of the pubic bone are the points for the ovaries in women and for the testicles in men. And sometimes both, depending on what they've done to themselves. But normally these are for ovaries in women and testes in men. In women, this is the regulation of progesterone and estrogen. In men, this is more the regulation of testosterone. And in fact, some of the people who did the training last year for sport, for the neuropower training, have been using these points to produce testosterone during their training, and they're actually, in fact, one of them you might remember, what was his name? The big guy? Gregory, that's right, Gregory. Gregory's training twice a day now. Twice a day. He was already big. Now he must be huge, you know. But he's sitting there rubbing his little points, you know. Oh, I have to rub my points again. You know. I wonder what the other weightlifters think about him. But he's doing really well with it. So for men, testosterone is down here. For women, particularly if you're wanting to become pregnant or regulate any of the menstrual cycle stuff, then these 2 points become really critical. So to be able to regulate all of these in a really good way, the first thing we do is to stimulate them in this order. Right? So you go under the clavicle, right? Halfway along the clavicle, on the underside, right? Rub it. Right? And then the other side. So you're starting out at the top of the hierarchy and you're going through the hypothalamus. You're stimulating the hypothalamus. Now you want to do this anyway, before you start any of the other technique stuff. In fact, this by itself, in fact, we were doing a free presentation down here a couple of days ago, and I illustrated this for one of the women in the group, and she rubbed the points, and I said, "How do you feel?" She said, "Oh, really great." In fact, a similar effect happened to one of the members of this audience at the free presentation the other day too. Just rubbing the points, remember that? Yeah? You still feel good? Yeah, good. Excellent. She wouldn't say no. I mean, she's surrounded by, you know, people who are learning this stuff. But just rubbing these points in this order by itself is enough to regulate the endocrine system to a point. And the point is that each of these will help a specific gland or set of glands to operate better. But it doesn't guarantee how they will relate to other glands, which is another part of what we'll be organising a bit later on. So the first thing to do is to go through and just rub the points. That's like waking up the endocrine system. It's like saying, "Hello, I'm paying attention to you. Now we're going to get in and reorganise." But you have to wake it up in the first place, and you do that just by rubbing the points. And in fact, you don't even have to do it in that order. So long as you do all the points and wake the system up, because the rest of the process is going to show you how to reorganise it. Okay? All right. We're doing well. So, after having rubbed all the points, now we're going to have to tie the points in to the neurology of the brain. This is a really important factor. In fact, if you have a look at page, what page is that? 11, where you have this illustration here, right, which is the eye positions that relate to each of the glands. The eye positions in combination with these reflex points is one of the strongest ways of reinforcing the endocrine system that I know. This is very, very strong stuff. This has helped people who have had hormonal problems all their life to get over them. You'll see that each one of the numbering of the glands is represented in the eye positions. So, for example, number 1 and 2, straight up, relates to the hypothalamus, right? So when you're rubbing the hypothalamus reflexes, you look up, straight up into the eye position and rub those points. Now what that does, looking up will tell your brain, I'm doing certain neurological processes. While you're doing a physiological input, the proprioception from here and the other neurological signals from here to the brain connects the actual glandular function with what the brain is talking about or wanting to do. naturally. This is genetically based stuff. You don't have to even know what's going on inside you for this to work. The question then is, why do you have to connect these reflexes to what's going on in the brain? Because as we get stressed in different ways and at different times of the month for women, that stress tells the brain, hey, something's going wrong. If the brain can't work out a solution, it will disconnect from the problem. A lot of people think the brain is connected to everything all the time. Well, it is, and it's not if it doesn't want to. It'll go off and do something else. You can't consciously think about everything at once. The subconscious can, but it's basically lazy. It doesn't want to do that because it creates or takes so much energy to do that. So it doesn't think of everything at once. In fact, it'll try and cut out as many things to think about as possible without you dying. But then sometimes it cuts out too much and you do die. So why we have to connect these points is because the brain, the subconscious, doesn't want to know about all the problems. And it can disconnect from lots and lots of stuff, and eventually those disconnections is what makes you sick. So really all we do is we reconnect things that are disconnected. We can create better options and connect things to them as well, but to start with, you're just connecting what's disconnected. The plugs have come out. The wire is not working, so you've got to plug it back in. So that's what's happening when you're looking in certain eye positions at the same time as rubbing these reflexes. Right? So when you're doing 1 and 2, you're looking up this way. When you're doing 3, pituitary and pineal, you're looking up this way. Now that's up to the right. So this picture is as if it was in front of me. Right? So I'm looking up this way into pineal and pituitary glands. Right? So looking up this way is the other side, right? The thyroid and the parathyroids. So if I'm rubbing these points down here, then I want to be looking up in this direction. If I'm doing the heart points, which are up above, 6 and 7, I'm looking straight forward. The same with the thymus, which is tapping. If I'm tapping the chest, I'm looking straight forward. Right? So you do all of these points in this order. This is where you have to follow the numbering. You do it in this order and look in the relative eye positions at the same time. That will reset the glandular system at a genetic-neurological level. That's the way it should be. That's just establishing the glandular system. It's just getting all the glands hooked in with the neurology so that it works better. All right? So you go through all of these, and all of these are numbered so that you can follow by the number while you put your eyes in the related position.